call is now being recorded.
Hello, Joseph Davis and Raul Varsany here. We're going to try to do a weekly, bi-weekly podcast. Try to keep it somewhat frequent. But anyway, this is our first one, so bear with us. We want to talk about where we get our news. Not that we're anybody's, we're nobody's, but look, we're trying. I run a site. Raul's got a Facebook page, Twitter account. We'll link to all these things below in a post. But anyway, with the current corporate controlled media, 90% of, there's 6, corporations own 90% of the U.S. media. So this is really for anybody that's kind of trying to get better sources of information because it's tough to wade through all the crap. That basically most of the corporate news, Fox, CNN, no matter which side, right or left, is controlled. So let's dive in and talk about, I want to point out too, in the alt media, though, there's a lot of controlled alt media as well, a lot more than people would know. So let's start talking about, Raul, who we go to get our day-to-day news, because it's kind of tough. So I'll let you start out with a couple of sources, and then I'll bash on them. I'm just kidding.
Nice. Yeah, one go-to that I've been kind of mentioning a bunch has been Thierry Meyson's VoltaireNet.org. Mm-hmm. I've been kind of checking that daily, and then let's see, William Engdahl, right? I think that's kind of one analyst we found that has been.
And we'll link to all these too on this post.
Yeah. And then those are just two coming off the top of my head. Although I can mention one thing real quick about Engdahl. I know in a radio interview it was interesting because I think he was talking about Muslim Brotherhood or maybe just like Salafi Wahhabi stuff. And then the host asked him about William Brennan converting to that caught Engdahl off guard. But when I looked into it,
say what you were saying. You got cut out for about 10 seconds.
Yeah, William Brennan. Apparently, I think that's CIA guy, right? Like the radio host was like, oh, he converted to, this is how deep this kind of Islamist ideology is going, that this top CIA guy converted to Wahhabi or whatever, and that caught Engdahl off guard. He kind of pushed back and he's like, well, I don't think that's the case. But when I looked into it, that appeared to be true. So we all have kind of our blind spots, just given who we're talking to, what the feedback
Absolutely.
is. Which is why
on that, I just wanted to bounce off of Engdahl. I'm going to post a link too below this podcast. He did a really good interview with Tim Kelly of the Our Interesting Times podcast, and that's one I highly recommend. Always look forward to what Tim's putting out there. He has I'll post this one to his interview with William Engdahl on the Roundtable War Wars and the Gods of Money discussion. And I also want to mention, Tim does, I want to link to his YouTube channel because he's I don't know if he's putting his weekly podcast with Joe Atwell. Joe Atwell too is it's a researcher, an author, documentarian, who I don't always agree with everything he has to say, but always has some interesting perspectives. They just did a podcast, he and Tim Kelly, on Ewan Cameron, MK Ultra, Zionist Nazis, mind control, a little bit on the Holocaust revisionism that I highly recommend. They also did one on the Civil War leading up to the Civil Rights Movement, which is, a lot of controversial topics, but, very interesting perspectives. He also has Jay Dyer as another person I need to subscribe. Jay's, I think his site is like $4.99 or $5 a month. He does weekly content, but he also puts out a lot of stuff for free and a lot of great articles. He's more into like social engineering, technocracy type discussions. So it's maybe not as current But he's had Doug Valentine, who is another great source. I follow him on Facebook. He posts quite a bit. Doug's a terrific writer, did this book on the Phoenix program I recommend. He also just released a book called The CIA is Organized Crime. Doug is a wealth of knowledge. Again, that's maybe not as so much as like current news. But going back to current news, though, somebody that I would highly recommend is Andrew Corbico. I'll link to his Facebook page because he posts there frequently. I've even reached out to him to see if he'll, start a medium.com or even a WordPress site too, because he's not on Twitter, because he writes for so many different publications. He actually works for Russia's Sputnik, which is paid for by Russia, Sputnik International. So disclaimer there, but still does, he's interviewed me on a couple of his podcasts, never edited anything and published it, even though I even tied in, Israel with 9/11 on it, and he still aired it. But he also writes for the Duran, also Global Village Space, which would contact there. Ali Saeed, through Andrew's interviews with me, reached out to me, and I've written some articles for them. So I'll definitely give a shout out to Global Village Space. A little biased because they published my articles, but I'm just pointing that out. So Andrew's great for all kinds of geopolitical analysis, regarding Russia-U.S. affairs. He goes into all kinds of different, Europe, Poland. He's written a series on Bahamas, so I'll link to his Facebook page. Definitely take a look through there and Google the guy. I'm talking too much, Raul. Who else you got?
Yeah, I just wrote down 3 names here that, let's see, the first 2 have been kind of recent finds. One is Kevork Almassian, that's Syriana analysis. He's been pretty top shelf. And then Hashim Al-Madani. So Hashim is an Iraqi expat living now in Spain, and he's got some really solid interviews about people who, primary source have had to flee from ISIS and deal with that whole kind of...
And he's interviewed these folks, right?
Right. Yeah, solid interviews. And he interviewed Kevork. And that was
Kevork, yeah.
Yeah, well, the interview with Kevork I thought was good because they finally brought both of the spears out, which is this Islamist Zionist dialectic, right? This toxic tango that they're engaged in, kind of one exploiting the other. And then there's another name that I have written down here, Ezeli Danto. So she's out of Haiti. She was the legal counsel for Aristide, who got pushed out by the Clintons way back when, and then with this whole earthquake in Haiti, right, the whole Clinton kind of operation there. Now, what Ezeli Danto pointed out to Roger, right, what she pointed out to Roger Stone is that Trump has ignorantly brought back Clinton's people into Haiti. So it's like meet the new boss, same as the old boss, right? So this is definitely
ignorant, but that's just me. I think it's
right. I'm being kind.
Hey, let's go through those. So we've got Kevork, and his site is Syriana Analysis, or just Google that. What's Hashim's site? I know it's a certain name.
Hashim Al-Madani. HashimAlmadani.com. That's hash.
Okay, it is his name. Okay.
Hashim Almadani.com, right?
Yeah, we'll link to your interview too, because that was a really good one too on the left in the Muslim Brotherhood.
Thank you.
We'll link to some of my stuff too, man.
Absolutely.
All right. Well, I'm gonna mention E. Michael Jones. He's very controversial. CultureWars.com. He's another guy from Tim Kelly that is a wealth of great information. He's more of an author, so I need to get to Robert Perry, Consortium News. I will say that's more 2D. I don't trust everything I read from Consortium News. They also, what was the guy's name? he actually has, he's still CIA, this guy, you can just smell him. He was involved with the Boston bombing because, one of the Smirnoff brothers,
Yeah.
it was the uncle of the Smirnoff brothers.
Graham Fuller.
Graham Fuller, the uncle of this guy lived in like his guest house and was married to his daughter or something like that. So he still reeks. So beware of Graham Fuller on the Consortium News, but still worth, kind of getting their perspective on current events. I still read some of their articles, especially Robert Perry's himself. So I do recommend it, but again, it's surface level. I don't think they go deep enough, but I do want to mention, same for anywar.com, even though obviously if you dig deeper, their main guy, and why am I drawing a blank on his name?
Justin Raimondo.
Justin Raimondo. He's done some great stuff regarding 9/11 and government sponsorships, even pointing out, Israel's possible involvement, even though he doesn't go nearly deep enough, but he does cite some good info there. But he's, citing Ann Coulter. So it's more surface level like Consortium News, but it's worth kind of getting. You're going to get some info about, I think Jason Dietz writes for them, and he, just mentioned that it appears that the U.S. has boots on the ground in Yemen, and it was from him, and he writes for anywar.com. Counterpunch is another one, but I will say that's the same thing that I'll point out with Robert Perry, and the same thing with Consortium News, and the same thing with Anti-War. But again, you're still getting a more of the left view of current events. So it's good to skim, but beware. And I would say that, about I don't agree with a lot of what they have to say, but it's good to get a certain perspective. And they talk about things you're not going to hear in the mainstream news. But again, beware. Same with Cynthia McKinney. I thought she was pretty good here until recently. And I think she's been working with a guy. I don't know if it's somebody you just mentioned.
Robert Steele.
But
Robert
Steele. I mean, it's just kind of crazy. I don't trust this, unrigged thing.
Unrigged.
And that kind of, I'll post something with Scott Crichton, who I actually do like, and even posted some of my stuff, or at least some of my tweets and stuff. I definitely tweeted him about certain things. So he's really good on the Greater Kurdistan project, and even kind of gives you some more alternative analysis of Turkey and Erdogan. He's just basically saying the people of Turkey are for Erdogan for a reason, and he's not saying that he thinks that Erdogan's a good guy, but don't listen to everybody just trashing Erdogan too. He did get rid of the IMF debt, but he's he's a character. He's playing with all sides, Israel, Russia, the EU, he's a NATO member. So but anyway, Scott's got some good info on that.
I'd like to point out that Turkey, this is one of those blind spots, right? Because, and this is where I wish, Sybil would have thrown us a bone, right? Because Turkey is occupying Iraq, it's occupying Syria, it's occupying, I believe, Cyprus, which is part of Greece, and so it's this weird, the neo-Ottoman sort of mentality. And then Erdogan, this is what Kevork pointed out in Hashim when they did their interview or chat, whatever you want to call it, that Kevork's you won't believe it, Hashim, Erdogan brought in these Chinese Uyghurs or whatever, right, Islamists from China. Erdogan went over there and basically riled them up. He's like, come on down, and he brought them into, this ties into this, the Yinon Plan, Greater Kurdistan Project, about what is Kurdistan going to end up, looking like? Is it going to remain within Iraq, right? And, that would be perfectly fine because it seems like they're doing okay as is. Or I think what Erdogan was trying to do, he's like, I'll give you Kurdistan. I'll take a big chunk out of Syria and then I'll genocide all of the local Kurds into that. And so
he's not going to give up any of Turkey, and that's part of the project.
Exactly.
They want a piece of Turkey. They want a piece of Syria. They want a piece of Iraq and even Iran. So, and the Anglo-Zionist plutocrat, the usual suspects are all for it. So, but I do, I think everybody can have some sympathy for the Kurds and a bit of understanding of why they want their own region, but they're being played.
Well, and I don't think it's necessarily that. I don't think it's necessarily that there has to be. I mean, we're all just talking hypotheticals, right? We're obviously in America here, so it's not, it's not like on our doorstep. But I don't think it's necessary that Kurdistan has to, become an officially recognized nation by the UN. It may just be kind of, folded into. One thing I'll give Assad credit for is he mentioned in some interview with Turkish journalists, he's like, look, we can be, the whole Silk Route thing, right? We don't have to be fighting. We can just be trading here. It can be, we can have peace, right? What I'm trying to get at is, I think one of the challenges in alternative media or in general speaking about the Kurds or whatever group as a homogenous block, and I point out Russell Means as an example. He was a Native American activist, and his whole thing is he would say as a Native American, he's like, we don't want this tribal independence. What we want is what you as Americans take for granted, which is your Constitution. We want constitutional protections on our land because something we don't miss. I think those of us that are generally for peace and we believe in indigenous rights and whatnot, what we don't understand is how a zone or a region can be exploited. So, here's your tribal land, here's your tribal police, and guess what? We control them because in the end of the day, it's the money that runs all these systems, which is why I was going to I have 3 things written down here. NATO, Bilderberg.org, and Interplay.
Hey, go ahead and say what you said. You said NATO and then cut out.
Sorry about that. Yeah, so Tony Gosling's website is Bilderberg.org perspective, right? Which kind of gets to the...
Start over from NATO, though. You cut out twice. For some
reason. I cut out twice, okay.
Yeah, it's okay.
All
Start back
right.
You were about to say you had 3 things written down or some things written down, and then you said NATO.
Yeah. Okay, so from the top, NATO, and then Tony Gosling's website, Bilderberg.org, okay, which basically goes into, how the Nazis were taken underground and then reformed into Bilderberg, Flight Capital. This ties into IG Farben, Bayer Corporation. Basically, the whole
C.D. Jackson that started Bilderberg. Am I correct? Or
you might be. This is one kind of researching now. And the third thing is the system of credit, and that really is, I think, where the whole left-right spectrum is going to boil down to is the system of credit. Is that supposed to be a government-run thing, a centrally controlled thing, or is it possible that the community can, actually use this thing, and how does that all work? And that's just kind of a future, just ongoing discussion.
I think that's another subject we could get heavily into is solutions for our current problem with the current central banking system. Right now it's private banks loan to governments. It's through a central banking system. We have the Fed here, even Russia's bank, China, all these people that are supposed to be, on the grand chessboard battling it out and enemies and stuff, their banks all link up, and it's, basically, started with the Bank of England, the Rothschild system, loaning to government. So, I have some opinions on that. I do believe in public banking as kind of steering the Titanic back to safety, but I don't think long term that public banking is. I'm talking about nationalizing the Fed over I've said this before, over maybe an 8 to 10 year period, and then at the same time you're setting up state and local public banks too, and where you can basically see where everything is going tax money wise. But again, that's not the end all be all. But going back to the subject of sources of information, a lot of that I get from Bill Still. But I only listen to Bill Still for monetary reform purposes. He's a Zionist. I don't agree with him on a lot of geopolitical issues. But monetary reform, I think he has a lot of really good, I recommend the Money Masters documentary he did, in the 90s. I believe you can just look that up on YouTube. I think going to some other sources, I do still listen to the Corbett Report, James Corbett. CorbettReport.com, Gnostic Media with Jan Irving. He talks more about the social engineering thing, along with like Jay Dyer, even though they kind of have had a dispute. But I've listened to both of those guys in their podcast. Jeff Blankford does, he's worth following on Facebook because that's where he publishes most of his, posts and content. But he has a radio show and podcast, and Jeff is, very critical of Israel and Jewish power. And Jeff is actually, born in a Jewish family, non-Zionist, but Jeff is an older guy, been to, Palestine, been talking about this for decades. And, I agree with a lot of the things he does. He's very questioning too of Netanyahu and Putin's relationship. So, he's one of the few people kind of talking about that. Same for Andrew Korbico, who's actually based in Moscow, but at least he's talking about it and putting forth good information on it. But Jeff, I definitely listen to his podcast when they come out. Like he had a really good one with Grant Smith talking about AIPAC not being registered as a foreign agent. And we know the Kennedys really wanted them to register. And they were what eventually was the precursor to AIPAC. It's the same thing. They just renamed it, the Israeli lobby. So, great source of information. A lot of these I'm just pulling from my blog roll. I still will occasionally listen to newsbud.com, Sibel Edmonds, but again, I don't totally trust them. I would put them in the same camp as some of the counterpunches and stuff. Pepe Escobar, roving correspondent for the Asia Times. I always think that he's got some good analysis. It's very 2D. He's very for, the things shifting to China and Russia and the multipolar world, which I understand because, America and its imperialism. But again, where I disagree with Pepe is just like where I think the same people running our government, at the very top, the high level, and, it is a little conspiratorial, but I think they're the same folks that are running Russia and China, and that, goes back to the banking system and who controls that, the Bank for International Settlements. And, once you start kind of understanding that everything's so centralized that, that's kind of how and where the central power system kind of resides, is control of the money flow. They can use that as a weapon and leverage over these countries too. And then you got to go back and look at, and this is going to dive into Brendan O'Connell's work. He's very controversial, and kind of pissed me off at first because I thought he was burning too many bridges, but he's put out some really good info, and I still listen to the guy. He's even said that he's like, he's a dissident from Australia. He basically got arrested for calling Zionist Israelis there a racist, and and may have gone a little far with it, but he didn't do anything that should constitute him going to jail for 3 years. Again, he didn't do anything that bad. He called a guy what he was. It was a racist, and for anybody that's looked into Israel, I mean, it's one of the most racist countries out there. So, which they need to be called out. But he gets very detailed into Operation Tolpiot and the Technion Institute and Unit 8200, and basically Israel's domination of the tech industry and high tech. And information is power. So Brennan's got great detailed information on this. And even talks about his time in Iran. Iran tried to offer him political asylum, and he started really talking about how what he experienced there, that they really didn't want to talk about, Israel's blatant racism and, Jewish power. They were more focused on the other GCC allied countries like, Saudi Arabia, and he just, he left, basically. He could have stayed there and actually, made a name for himself, but he would have had to basically compromise himself. So he's got some integrity there. I'll give it to him. I think the guy's really genuine. And worth listening to. So I'll definitely point him out and his site, Isolate but Preserve. What? Isolate but Preserve. I think it's blogspot.com. Anyway, I'll link to it below. He's on my blog roll. And that'll kind of, I'll mention Ryan Dawson. Raul, you there? I want to make sure you get dropped.
No, I didn't get to
okay. No, you just were cutting out early. So anyway, but Ryan Dawson, Ryan Dawson to me, he's another controversial guy. A lot of people hate the guy. And he's, and Brendan O'Connell's bashed on him, because he doesn't talk about Tolpiot. But at the end of the day, Ryan has done some of the greatest work on Israel's role in 9/11 that can't be overlooked. I highly recommend War by Deception, which is free it's the best documentary. It was what pulled me out of the Jonestown crowd and David Icke and stuff. Because when I first started getting into this stuff, that's where you get led, is into InfoWars and David Icke, and you're like, oh my God, what's going on? And because I, started questioning things after I watched Loose Change, but it's a crap documentary as far as content goes. I came across Ryan Dawson's work and War by Deception, that I started like, oh man, no, this has got substance. He's naming names, and actually putting things out there I hadn't heard about, but really telling you who did 9/11. And with concrete sources, even mentioning there's a Memphis connection, a group of guys that were working for an Israeli named Sergei Denko that got arrested here in Memphis, who were getting Tennessee issued licenses from a state worker named Catherine Smith that was burned alive a day before the trial. So anyway, he's also got a document that is for, you have to pay for it, but, I do recommend it. It's 5 hours, but if you got the time, it's called Empire Unmasked. It's great. And the thing about Ryan is he's introduced me to a lot of information. He's the one that introduced me to Jeff Blankford, even Brendan O'Connell, and Pepe Escobar. There's been several people that he's, he was working for Sibel Edmonds when it was before Newsbud of BowlingFrogsPost.com, but I think he was the one that introduced me to Bill Sill too. So just, Ryan's got a lot of really good connections in the alternative media community of people like in Mike O'Kale, who passed away, but I do like a lot of Mike's writings, and he's going to have a book hopefully published if his family is okay with it. And I hope that, Ryan has a hand in that and gets it out there. And maybe they'll set up a foundation for him for the proceeds or whatever. And that's another guy too that was working with Mike O'Kale was Gerard O'Colmain. He's Irish, but he lives in France. But man, that guy, he went on RT after one of the I can't remember which French attack that happened, a false flag attack, and it was one of the best RT interviews I've ever seen. Again, I don't totally trust RT, but I do occasionally watch some of their programming with Peter Lavelle. But, again, I point out that they're funded by the Russian government. So, but I think they're a little more honest about things than a lot of our U.S. media that, is totally infiltrated by the CIA. But going back to Gerard O'Colman, he'll even tell you he's a communist, so beware there. But Gerard actually has some really good writings. I've guest posted a couple of his posts on my site. Same with some of Ryan's videos too, and even Kevork that you mentioned earlier. I have Kevork on the blog roll. I liked his interview. I like how Kevork will actually point out too that he knows Assad's not a saint, but he's their best option too in Syria. And he's honest about that. But and I have Sarah Abed too, and we were just talking about earlier. She just messaged me about my recent article, which I hope she reads. But let's talk about this a little bit. Some of these sources that I'm even mentioning, they have a blind spot for Russia. Now, I'll admit, if it weren't for Russia, Syria would be overrun with jihadi, nutters, these Wahhabist, terrorist groups. But it would be. But at the same time, Russia's kind of moved in, and it looks like they're going to be there long term, but they're working hand in glove and are allies with Israel. But people have a huge problem in the alternative media. They Putin worship. They, have this blind spot for Russia because of their role. But what they're not seeing is that, they have a hand in setting up these safe zones that the West wanted and Israel wanted, honestly. But they're, again, they're not, I think, what the West, you could argue that's not exactly what the West wanted. But, they're inching towards, it's like this mission creep. And Andrew Corbico has written a ton about this, and I've shared a bunch of his articles and linked to him in my latest article on Global Village Space. But, you know, it's very controversial. People don't want to hear it. They're kind of blind to it. They want, you know, somebody to be the hero and, you know, but again, at the end of the day, you know, you do have to understand that, Russia, you know, Putin, Netanyahu, you're not going to hear Putin bashing on Israel. He'll bash on the West all the time, but he's not going on Israel. And, you know, how much control does Israel have over our government? Look at AIPAC. I mean, come on, people, we got to connect the dots. So, anyway, I'll let you talk some. I'm rambling.
No, it's all good. It's all good. I just, kind of took some notes down on some of the things you were mentioning, and I think what we're dealing with is a status quo, you know, where everything is through government contracts, the whole development, one China, one one road, one belt, you know, it's all through government
roads.
Right. And it's all through government contracts, and that's something I can kind of tout my labor organizing experience, is that's really where you saw the corruption, you know, because government contracts, they go to the highest briber. You know, they don't go to the lowest bidder. They go to the highest briber, right? Whoever can grease the wheels in the background, you know. So until we get to a paradigm where we're talking about equity, you know, where things are actually locally run, owned, and controlled, and that's something by chance I picked up on listening to Gulag Archipelago. It's like the audio version is like 20 hours or something crazy, but Alexander Solzhenitsyn's Gulag Archipelago, where he mentions that the first group the Bolsheviks targeted were the cooperatives. And essentially these cooperatives, right, were independently run industries. So the Bolsheviks couldn't have that because they were seeking total domination, right, totalitarian power. And so that's who they went after first. And you'll notice cooperatives never get mentioned. The only time, if you like Google around, you might find in the UK there's all these cooperatives, but guess what? They're all 100%, not 100%, but the majority government run. So it's the same old thing of sticking your hand out, you know, saying to the government, we need this, and it's just not what the original, you know, cooperatives. I'm talking about trade guilds getting into classical liberalism, you know, how was money actually formed, which was just kind of people exchanging, you know. So that's one of the blind spots. And you mentioned these media operations. Now, this is something I haven't fact-checked, but Gordon Bowden, very interesting character. Older gentleman, Royal Air Force, he's a Royal Air Force veteran. He's an engineer. He was a miner in the past. He uncovered, there's this whole thing about shell corporations and, you know, the Masonic Lodge, the conspiracy with the P2 lodges, and this.
Hey, you cut out. You said Masonic Lodge and then cut out. Start back there if you don't mind, Raul.
Yeah. So Gordon Bowden uncovering this conspiracy, this plot of these Masonic lodges. Not all of them, obviously. Okay, all you need are one or two dirty apples, rotten apples to spoil the bunch. But that there's some address. I'm blanking. In some insane amount, 300-400 shell corporations registered under one address, and this is where a bulk of all this, you know, dark, dirty money, you know, is running through. And he gets into Margaret Thatcher's son being involved in getting the nukes out of South Africa, right? That Israel helped develop for the apartheid regime over there. You know, getting them out, and this goes back to. You know, and so then it's like it makes you do a double take, right? Like, wow, if you have, you know, all you need is one nuke, right, to set off World War III, and that ties back to off cyanide and the whole USS Liberty attempted false flag, right? So if one nuke is bad, I mean, you got three, you know, nukes floating around, right? And you could ship them in anywhere, right? Oh, Saddam doesn't have WMDs. Now he does because we shipped one in, right? Or Assad, or
we gave it to him.
We gave it to him, yeah. You know, that's the old Bill Hicks joke.
North Korea. Rumsfeld, North Korea. I mean, come on.
Absolutely. You know, and one other thing I wanted to point out, just so our listeners can start getting a glimpse in how dirty this game is, okay, we can look at Iran's history, and you really have to go back to the Qajar dynasty, I'm talking early 1900s, to see how the British set up the monarch, right? I mean, the monarch was being ethical. He was being classically liberal, by contracting with the British, to help, the British were like, we'll help develop your petroleum industry, and that's fair. There's nothing wrong with having outside help, okay? But then all of a sudden, the Brits turn around and go, oh, we're not going to honor the contract, and that, million or 10 million, whatever money that they pledged, they contracted to purchase, they just reneged on it. So then guess what? You have a bankrupt government, all of a sudden a so-called revolution, right? And the monarch is taken out, right? And this is where I think maybe the first Shah, Reza Pahlavi, was brought in, and then Mossadegh came in, right? This is kind of the USSR access, if you will, kind of rejecting the Western, imperialists, right? But then Mossadegh gets taken out, right, by the CIA. So then they bring in, they bring in the Shah back. And I don't know if it's the Reza Pahlavi, it's like his son, or there's like definitely a family dynasty, right? But the point I want to make here is that, I was kind of, let's say in my college days, going, oh, the Shah, he was evil. He had Savak, this very totalitarian state police, okay? But again, you have to, it's like saying, Gaddafi is evil, or Assad's evil, or, okay, Saddam is evil, right? Okay, fine, they're totalitarians, right? But then what is being brought into the shadows, right? You take out a guy that, was at least secular, okay, was on camera with, what's his name from 60 Minutes, right? What's that interview the Shah did? What's that 60 Minutes guy?
I know what you're talking about, though. Brendan had it in his video about was the Iran Revolution for real? But you can look that up. Brendan O'Connell, was the Iran Revolution for real? On YouTube, you'll find it, and then that Shah interview is the first thing you'll see. Shah.
Right, and in the 60 Minutes interview, what's really important for people to know is the Shah flat out said the Zionists are in domination of U.S. media, and the Zionist or Israeli lobby, however you want to say it, right, is too big even for Israel's interests, right? We're talking about, politics, open source, rational things, right? There's no, we might have our favorites in politics, but in the end of the day, it's not about your side, my side. It's like, guys, we need to be honest and straightforward, because this isn't football where, the loser, goes home, no big deal. This is like, the loser's getting beat up, bloodied, and now we're all getting blowback, right? It's like, oh, great, all these buildings are blowing up, right? So you had the Shah pointing out this cancer, of Zionism that I think, I'll say ties back to Bilderberg or whatever, but that it was not even good for Israel, because the people of Israel, right, you have Christians, Muslims, Jews, Arabs, non-Arabs, whatever, making up Israel. You have Palestinians, right? And for them to have peace, they need to be able to deal things, locally. And Ron Paul always points this out. If the U.S. just got out of there, I think the people would figure things out. But we've got this Zionist lobby that is doing things for the benefit of who? For the military-industrial complex, right? And all those bottom feeders. So my long point was the Shah was taken out. Ayatollah Khomeini was brought in, and you had an Islamist, what I would say, I don't know, I like saying the word devolution, because it implies that things went backwards. And that's what happened, because Iran was a very open, secular, progressive society, women looking just like Western women, and the history of Iran goes way back, pre-Islam, and there's even a famous recording. I'll give a hat tip to Ali Rizvi 313 on Twitter, where he sent me a clip of this old Iranian monarch, Persian monarch Yazgerd III, saying to the Arab invaders, you guys are telling us about the one God. He's like, we've been spreading this, forever and ever, and the fire worship that we do, it's representative of the spirit. So go back to your lizards, go back to your deserts, and go away. So it's really stepping back and looking at this invasion that I think, was not anything to do with original Islam, and that's a whole, of course, that's a bag of worms that we'll unpack later, but just have to
yeah, but on that note, I just want to point out what you were talking about with Iran, and was it a real revolution? You know, the Ayatollah was in France, you know, and then comes over. Well, look, Afghanistan, you saw a lot of the same things. You saw a very progressive, more Western kind of, you know, trajectory, leading up to through the 60s and until about the mid to late 70s. And then what happened? And again, this is a Western viewpoint. If you ask the average, especially on the right, American about like what's going on in the Middle East, why is there such a problem? They're like, it's just, you know, these ragheads just can't, you know, just constantly want to fight.
Right.
That's all they want to do. It's like, they don't understand, like, if you was what? To go towards a more progressive society. You had women that weren't wearing the burqa. They were, you know, wearing, you know, I'm not saying like slutty stuff, but I mean just stuff that was like, you know, more Western at that time. And then what did we do? We had Brzezinski. We had in the Carter administration, and this is openly acknowledged that they started arming the Mujahideen, you know, the Wahhabi nut jobs that later became, you know, what became the Taliban and Al-Qaeda, and you know, openly admitted. And even going as far in the Washington Post, which is a CIA-run rag, but they had an article, and I want to say it was like early 2000s, talking about how, this is when W was in office, how they openly admit that we spent millions, our government spent millions of dollars on textbooks that had violent imagery of, you know, like, you know, pushing this sick, perversion of Islam, Sunni Wahhabi nut job ideology to children. And so, you know, our government did that. You know, Western powers with Israel's involvement in Saudi Arabia. And, you know, and a lot of this goes back to UN recognizing Israel and the Brits and the U.S. Anglo-Zionist powers installing Israel, and Saudi Arabia would not exist without Israel. So it's these people that are still, this iteration of power that's still in charge, you know, is responsible for all the turmoil that we see over there, and even Africa too. You know, Israeli fingerprints all over that. You know, like you mentioned South Africa, but it goes well beyond that. Rwanda, the Congo, and that doesn't get mentioned nearly enough. We know we destroyed Libya for Israeli interests. You know, and Gaddafi was a strong man, but I mean, they were much better off with Gaddafi, much better off with Hussein, and, you know, even, you know, obviously, Assad. There was no Al-Qaeda or ISIS presence in any of those countries until Western involvement and Israeli involvement. And then, you know, now we see Russia coming in to save the day, but they're just hand in glove with the Israelis. So beware, folks, you know, and Andrew Corrigo, thank you, you know, and going back to getting your, you know, information. He'll have an article too about Kurdistan tomorrow. I'm really looking forward to reading. I've had some discussions with him about it. So looking forward to that. A couple other ones that really questions, you know, Jewish power and Zionist, you know, the Zionist lobby is Grant Smith. He writes for Anywar.com, but he's a good one. He's got an Institute for Research, Middle Eastern Policy, you know, not kooky conspiracy stuff. I mean, just lays it out with facts. He and Jeff Blankford, another great source, have done some great interviews together. I recommend, you know, just look up Grant Smith, Jeff Blankford, or just look up Grant Smith, Israel. Also, If Americans Knew, what's her name that runs it? I'm just drawing a blank on her name. But she's the main person who, runs it, Allison Weir. She's done some, I think Jeff Blankford's done some interviews with her. But If Americans Knew has some really fact-based information on, U.S.-Israel affairs that I highly recommend. And so, in Global Research, it's out of Canada. Again, I think that they are too heavy on the Russia side of things, but they still have some really good alt media analysis that I do recommend. Eva Bartlett too, and her Syria analysis, and even Vanessa Beasley. You know, but again, I think that you know, I would like to see them questioning more about Russia, and I think over time they will. They're going to come around. Same for Patrick Henningsen. two of 21stcenturywire.com. I recommend them too. Most of these two are on my blog roll. So, and I want to point out one, this is a random one, but Chris Wark of ChrisBeatCancer.com. I'm going to throw him out there just as far as health stuff. He's a Memphian too, so I want to mention him as far as like health news and alternative therapies and stuff. And I'm not disregarding all Western medicine either. I do think that integrated approaches are the way to go, and I do want to point out Chris Wark. So I would love to see Ben Swan come back. He did like he was with a Cincinnati Fox Philly. I don't know if it's a Fox Philly, but he was with, and then he moved down to Atlanta. And this is just like a local news channel, Ben Swan. And then he did a story, like on a local news story in Atlanta on Pizzagate. And then all of a sudden he goes black. Like there's like his site's down, his YouTube's down. And Pizzagate, people think that that's just like complete bunk, fake news. And it's like, well, I mean, if you know about some of these upper echelon people and, child sex trafficking and, the Franklin affair, even after Pizzagate, there was a Norway bust, and they admitted in a New York Times article, they yanked down, they were talking about how all these people that were busted were all like high stature people, like, politicians, high-ranking officials, lawyers, and you're just like, I mean, it's a cesspool at the top. And a lot of it is raw. You talked about it in your interview with Hashim about how it's used as blackmail. You get like Dennard Hastert, who Sabella Newsbud and James Cormitt did a really good overview that I do recommend. Just look up Dennard Hastert Newsbud. You'll find it. I mean, this guy was the second or third in command of the U.S. government.
He was Speaker of the House.
Speaker of the House, and he's raping. He's a kitty fiddler. And how much time did he get? By the way, he only got a slap on the. And he didn't have to serve much time. And I don't even think it was over those charges. It may have been something else, but that came to light. It's just sick. And again, with all this tech and stuff, especially the Israelis run it, they're sucking up all our data. Goes straight through the NSA and straight to Israel too. And again, this is part of the Tolpiot program.
PTEC.
Yeah, PTEC. I mean, all of it, that all links up to the Tolpiot, Operation Tolpiot. Again, there is a decent amount of info. Brendan's info is good, but there's more out there. But anyway, but they use this.
Well, and I wanted to
stuff. It's like, oh, you're having a marital affair. Well, we want you to vote for this. Oh, you're a judge. We're going to put that judge over there because he's compromised over this trial and make sure it never sees the light of day. Like Brendan's trial, he's trying to bring it's a high court in Australia. He's doing his damnedest to, get something going. He wants to get it to a level. And again, I don't know all the details. You can find this on his site. All his paperwork to basically have people he can bring on the stand as character witnesses and to talk about, Jewish power and bring it out in the open, in the public domain. It's kind of similar to Ernst Zundel, who just passed away. And again, I'm not a Ernst Zundel fan. The guy was a loony for Hitler, but he was jailed for questioning the Holocaust in Canada. But, David Cole Stein pointed this out in his research that he got a lot of his information from Ernst Zundel because it was publicly available through his trial. He had these expert witnesses and stuff, and Canada made a huge mistake. They should have just left him alone. That, was enough for a Zionist Jew like David Cole to question the Holocaust. And, but again, Brendan is trying to do something similar and Brendan's, again, a genuine guy. He's not some Hitler worshiper. I really like what he puts out there. I think he is a little controversial and burns some bridges, but, again, I'm not going to disregard what he has to say, because I think he's got a lot of decent information. I wish him the best of luck with this Australia High Court case. I hope it happens. I hope he gets some good witnesses up there or testify and get some great information about Israel in the public domain. And we do have to expose this Zionist power structure. And again, this is not, I have Jewish friends and, my brother's a quarter Jewish, whatever that means, because I don't think it's, it is a religion versus ethnicity, but, it's tough, it's difficult. It's like, a lot of the friends that I have that are Jewish, I've mentioned this to you, Raul, they don't even know what the Likud party is. They, just, go along with the Zionism and Israel support because, they're just kind of taught to do that, but they're not very knowledgeable. A lot of them are mostly just secular and just don't, give it the time of day. And they're like most people, they don't, really question or not very political in general, So, but awareness is key, and that's why we're having this conversation and putting it out there, because I do hope that people kind of listen to some of these contexts that or news sources that are alternative and kind of dig deeper into them. And we'll definitely post these below and hope people actually take a look and start following some of these folks and sites. And again, we're not saying that you or I agree with everything they put out there. It's just getting alternative viewpoints. A lot of these people I'm pointing out and sites are like I said, Jarrod is a freaking communist. Ryan's a libertarian. Dawson,
I think Ryan's an anarchist. We'll have to,
whatever. But you get what I'm saying. I'm just saying that I don't think he's put it out there that he's a libertarian, and that's what he claims. He's a minarchist, if you want to go. I know he's not an anarchist, but I'm just trying to make the point that the sources I follow are, what you would consider right and left. There's a broad mix of them that, that I try to get alternative viewpoints from. I am concerned that not enough of them, though, are talking about Russia and Israel, and they, you need to understand about the fall of the Soviet Union and the migration of all these Russian Jews and even non-Jews to Israel after, in 91, the fall of the Soviet Union, and how that's played into the political structure of Israel and how much sway that a lot of these folks from Russia have with Israel, and that, it's a tight relationship. And just because Putin's in charge doesn't mean that he kicked out some Russian Jewish oligarchs. He's still tight with a lot of these other oligarchs, Jewish oligarchs too, maybe not all of them are Jewish, but but they're, part of the plutocracy, and Putin's a big part of this power structure. He's not the hero. He's not the good guy. China is definitely not. Look at their government, human rights abuses, slave labor, and James Corbett did a great, look this up, China and the New World Order, Corbett, and watch it. I highly recommend it. He goes over in detail about how these plutocrats, these Western, like the Rockefellers and beyond, built up China to what it is today. And again, you think that we just like the Al Qaeda, we built them up and now we're just going to leave them alone. And 9/11, come on, man. They still work hand in glove together, just like we still work hand in glove together with, or not we, our government, the CIA, with Al Qaeda. And, again, the recent announcement, though, in Syria is that Trump is cutting all the funding for the rebel Al Qaeda funding, and now we're just supporting these Kurdish forces in Syria. And then I think the plan is to break off a piece of Syria and to still balkanize it. And I think Russia's going to play a part in that, and they already kind of are. So, got anything else?
Yeah. I just wanted to add on the 9/11 tip, Barbara Honegger. She's kind of that's another odd blind spot. It was Ollie Rizvi 313 that mentioned her name, and I was like, who? And then I looked at some of her stuff, and she has some some credentials. She goes back to, I believe it's either Reagan or Bush, where kind of was it Catherine Austin Fitts, right? I mean, they actually have government.
She was a good one too.
Right. They were actually in the government, So Barbara Honegger, and she's very open. She lives in, I think, Carmel Valley, California. Actually, not by Hollister, about an hour from where I'm at. I'm originally from San Jose, California. So hopefully I'll get to break some bread with her someday. But aside from Barbara Honegger, you mentioned that title, the Mossad motto, War by Deception, and there's a book by a former Mossad agent, right? Victor Ostrovsky. You can get it. You can get the PDF, and that really opens your eyes to this kind of it is a delusion, right? That Mossad has this idea of everything's a battlefield, everywhere's a battle, right? And this concept of spying in, so that anyone that's Jewish is like, oh, can you help our cause, help Israel? And people don't know, right? They only know what they're being fed by the media, So this is how they get all the fake passports and whatnot. So Victor Ostrovsky's book is definitely an eye-opener. One thing I'll point out, and just, I guess, for the listeners to ponder, right, with 9/11 and all these operations, is that at the top, you've got Mossad, you've got CIA, you've got DGSE, which is French intel, you've got MI6, you've got Pakistani ISI, right? So they all kind of intermingle, or it's like, oh, I can't operate there, so I'll call my buddy who can, and so that's how they kind of get away with their stuff. But one thing I'll point out in Libya was that even Hezbollah was implicated, and I believe it was by the Moriartys, Libyan War Truth, which is one source I forgot to mention. But this is a couple that did business with the oil industry in Libya, was there when NATO started bombing, and they, their whole tale is something just really kind of just amazing. They're a big primary source. But that's, I think, where you can see that, okay, these are the intelligence agencies that are kind of, getting mixed in. And Hezbollah is that one that's kind of like, okay, we want to be, definitely in Syria, they've been, standing up for the Syrian people, right? But you can see how, these intelligence agencies could conspire together, to bring someone down like Gaddafi, So we talked about Brendan Martinez earlier, kind of a notorious character, but he did have a link to some article about Hezbollah and Iran kind of promoting the overthrow of Gaddafi, and that just one name rung out was Al Fatah. He has this website, Libya Against Superpower Media. You can kind of Google it, but stuff coming out from Libya that we just don't hear.
Yeah, I know people, tend to hate the guy. I don't really care. He's just, you talking about burning bridges, but on that note, when I look at something like Hamas that Israel actually created, they're known for creating their enemies. So, how much, you mentioned Hezbollah, and I know this is very conspiratorial, but at the end of the day, it's they need enemies to justify all these bloated military budgets and all this tech and stuff. For people, it's creating these strategies of tension constantly on all levels for for people to clamor for more government, more statism, to justify it all. But it's all ridiculous. It's not for our benefit. It's for theirs. It's excuse me, control mechanism. So, we have to, stop the hero worship. You're your own hero. That's my way of looking at it. But we do need to end things, shortly. Let's, send me some links to the things you discussed. I've got my blog roll, and, I'll definitely hook up the MP3. I'm going to post it, I'll post it on my YouTube channel just because it's an outlet, but I can still upload it as an MP3 to my blog. And if whoever's listening, if you listen this long, we appreciate it. Hopefully we can do more of these. Maybe we can do them a little shorter. Just depends on, how much time we have. But yeah, Raul, it's been great. Send me the links to, I had Voltaire, what was it, .net or .com and
VoltaireNet.org. Yeah.
I've got the Black Lung Pup, but, anyway, we'll post those all, and we hope you check them out. Check out my blog, Raul. Follow Raul on Twitter. Your handle's Raul Varshney. We'll link to it as well. And, hopefully we'll do more of these. And again, appreciate everybody listening.